I am Daniel Lucas, and welcome to Book 101. Book 101 is all about the books that I read for the last 40 years, and today I have my special guest. He's the author of several books, no other than Mr. Gary Hill. Mr. Gary, welcome to Book 101. And can you please introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Gary Hill, and I publish Music Street Journal. I've written quite a few books of my own, and I also run Tales of Wonder and Dread, where I publish lots of books, including some books that aren't mine and a lot of anthologies and things like that. And I also do something called Spooky Ventures, where I do videos online.
Wow, interesting, Mr. Gary. What age did you realize that you're good in writing?
I was writing when I was a little kid. And I remember probably 12 years old, I was writing movie scripts and comic books. And actually, one of the comic books that I wrote at the time, um, I wound up writing later as a novel, and then I rewrote it a couple of times, and I published it a couple of years ago as Wizard Song, and that's a sort of a novella. But yeah, it started from a comic book that I wrote when I was 12.
Who are your favorite authors that influence you the most?
I really love H.P. Lovecraft's writing. And I didn't really like him at first when I started reading his stuff. His writing style was hard to get into, and as a person, he's a little problematic. But his writing, the tales he came up with were pretty incredible. Um, Funny thing is, I'm probably in a lot of ways more influenced by movies and television, and when I write, I actually see it as movies in my head, and so it's sort of my stories tend to be paced that way, um, rather than paced literarily. They're more like cinematic.
So, if you describe the writing of your favorite authors, what is it, Mr. Gary, or what are they?
Well, I think the things that I really like in terms of Lovecraft's writing is just the worlds that he creates, and I like the fact I have a very big thing for cosmic horror. I think, and to me, cosmic horror is something that's just so large and powerful that you really can't wrap your head around it, and it's like we're almost inconsequential because next to it, which to me is about as foreboding and horrifying as you can get. That's certainly a lot more horrifying than some slasher running around, but I do like slasher movies. Um, but I have to look at some of the other things that really have influenced me over the years. Like I said, cinematic wise, I was a huge Star Trek fan, and that was like a grounding force for me and something that is probably in a lot of my science fiction. Um, and also, I was a huge comic book superhero kind of person. And it's funny, I mentioned that Wizard Song, and all those things that not the horror, but comic books and superheroes are merged in that. And along with, my recent book, Sing a Song of Dread, is music and horror, but Wizard Song also had music in it. It was like pop, progressive rock along with sort of superhero stuff and like space opera. So those are kind of the things that really influenced me, I guess.
Very well said, Mr. Gary. So, what are your short term and long term goals in writing?
In writing, well, I've got the sequel to Wizard Song that I am have been working on for about 2 years, and I'm trying to get that done. Um, and I'm in the process of putting together a book called Horrifying Holidays 2, which is a Christmas time horror. And I've got one short story that I've still got to finish for that, and then I've got to edit and do a little bit of rewrites and stuff on it. So I'm trying to get that done hopefully this week so I can get the book put together and out by the first part of next month. Um, so those are short term. Long term, actually, my very, very first book that I put out was a nonfiction book called The Strange Sound of Cthulhu, music inspired by the writings of H.P. Lovecraft. And that's my best selling book, probably my best known book. And it's like, it'll be 20 years old in 2026. And so I have a goal, and I've been working on it a little bit, of putting out a revised and expanded version of that book for the 20th anniversary. And I've also got another nonfiction book called Poetry of the Air, which is about interviews with musicians and what got them into music in the first place. And that will be 10 years old in the same year. So I want to do a revised edition of that for 2026 as well. Plus, I'm always working on more Tales of Wonder and Dread books.
Wow, interesting, Mr. Gary, and good luck for your goals in writing. So, before we go on, I want to shout out to the people listening in the United States, especially in the state of Illinois. Where are you living now, Mr. Gary?
I'm in northern Illinois, kind of near Rockford, sort of not too far from Chicago, about 70 miles from Chicago, probably.
Yes, thank you, Illinois, for supporting this podcast because I got 45 places in Illinois, in Chicago. Chicago, Illinois, I got 87% audience share. Justice at 11%, Minooka at 1%, Lake Zurich at 1%. I will just name 10 places. Schaumburg, if I pronounce well,
Oh,
1%. Rockford, yes, Mr.
if I
Gary?
can mention something for the
Yes.
folks in northern Illinois, I've got a number of books out. I've got Spooky Rockford and Spooky Rockford 2. Also, Spooky State Line and Spooky State Line 2. Those are all based in the Rockford area, and they're both nonfiction and fiction stories. Some of them are mine, some are other people's. And then I've also got Spooky Berwyn 1, 2, and 3, which are all based around the Chicago area, and the same kind of thing, nonfiction and fiction stories, collections of stuff. So, yeah, I've got those areas covered pretty well.
Yes, Rockford, Springfield, Sycamore, Manhattan, Aurora, Lake Forest, Elgin, and a lot more. Thank you, Illinois. First, I got 45 places in Illinois. Thank you so much for supporting this podcast because this podcast is created to empower writers all over the world, like Mr. Gary Hill. Mr. Gary, sing a song of dread, the place where music and horror meet. How did you crafted it?
um, I had the idea of putting together a book like that for a while, and so I just, as I always do, I put out open calls for to collect stories, and fortunately, I got enough stories from other people. I already had the three that I had were already published, so I just republished those, and then added the others. And we've actually got two public domain stories in there: Old Nurse's Story by Elizabeth Gaskell from 1852, and the music of Eric Zahn from H.P. Lovecraft from 1921 that I just sort of used to fill out the book. Plus, it's funny when I do these anthologies, I hear from a lot of the authors that they absolutely love seeing their work in a book with somebody like Lovecraft or Poe. So it's kind of cool to include those old stories. And the other thing is, I think a lot of times if somebody's drawn in for the newer stories, then if they may have never read the older ones, and it gives them sort of a look at something like that, and maybe they'll be drawn into it and look at some of those other old stories that are out there.
Mr. Gary, sing a song of dread is your latest book.
Yes,
Is it an anthology?
yes, it is.
Sing a song of dread. What behind the title of this anthology?
It's just horror stories that have a music angle to them.
Are you the head of this book publishing, or you are one of the contributor?
I'm both, actually. In this case, um, I'm the publisher and I was the editor, and uh, I've got three stories in it.
If you summarize the book itself, can you give five adjectives of the book?
musical, scary, um, horror. That isn't really an adjective, but creepy, um, gloomy, but also happy.
Well done, Mr. Gary. What inspired you to write Sing a Song of Dread?
Well, the stories that I have in there all sort of had different origins. The one story I have, the debut tour, was sort of my attempt at creating a modern H.P. Lovecraft story. So I tried to capture sort of his feel of stories. Um, and On the Road With is kind of an interesting story, because that's one. There's a fictional band in the story, and it's actually a band that I used to be in, and one of the characters is named Dark Star, which was my stage name, and it's sort of a fictional, I mean, very much fictional version of me, because this character is actually a vampire, but so it's kind of a fictional version of me. And then the other one is that I wrote for here is called I Saved the Beatles, and I sort of had an idea of creating a feel good vampire story, and I wanted to bring the Beatles into it just because I thought it would be an interesting angle. And I actually think I pulled off the. That's why I said happy, because that's actually, I mean, it got vampires and everything, but it's actually kind of a happy sort of story, if you can believe that.
Oh, yes, definitely. Can you describe the research process behind Sing a Song of Dread?
The what processes?
Research
Oh,
process.
it's funny. I actually did quite a bit of research on that. I Saved the Beatles story, um, because the whole story takes place when the Beatles made their first trip to the United States. And so I had to go and research all the dates, find out what hotels they stayed at. I had to figure out where that hotel was in relationship to Madison or to Central Park. And I had to work out a lot of that stuff. I also, um, the narrator starts off the story talking about when he was in World War II. So I had to do some research about some of that stuff. And, um, there was quite a bit of research that went into that story because I wanted to make sure that I got as many of the details right as I could. The other stories being purely fictional, although On the Road With has a few things that aren't purely fictional. Like there's a story in that one that's not researched, but it was something that I actually lived through. Was the band that is sort of loosely based on? We had a practice space in Rockford, and our space it was in this building where there were a lot of other practice spaces. Well, the practice space above ours, directly above ours, was Cheap Tricks, and so I mentioned in that thing one instance where we sat and listened to Cheap Trick play. Well, that actually did happen. We were in our practice space, and Cheap Trick were practicing one night, and we just sat and listened to them for a while and had a good time. It was like a private Cheap Trick concert. Um, so that sort of is in there. It's fictionalized a little, but it actually did happen.
What challenges did you face while writing Sing a Song of Dread?
Challenges. Well, getting books out and done. I mean, you know what? It's once you've done one or two, it becomes that tells you that you can do it, and it becomes a little easier. But it's never easy. I mean, you've got to go through and assemble them. Especially with me, I do more than just I do all the formatting. I put the books together, and in this case, I didn't do the front cover, but I did the back cover. A lot of times, I'll do all the cover, and so there's a lot involved with it. But it can be challenging getting everything to line up. The thing is, the more of them you do, the easier it gets. And you learn over time. I've done a lot of freelance writing too, where you have to meet deadlines, and so you learn over time that maybe what you're putting in there isn't going to be what you would consider perfect, but it's certainly good enough to go. And if you wait for perfect, you're never going to get it done. And so those are the kind of things that you just sort of learn over time. I mean, I've been doing this a long time, so I I don't know that. I mean, there are always challenges, but I don't know that they're ever that huge anymore.
Yes. Mr. Gary, how did you deal with writer's block?
Oh, now that's an interesting one. That does come up, and that's one of the problems with the Wizard Song sequel. Um, in my way of dealing with writer's block is, well, first off, one thing that you have to do whenever you're going to be writing, as far as I'm concerned, is you write every day. I don't care what you write every day. Um, and it may not even be something you ever intend to publish, but you need to set aside time and write every day because that gets you in the practice of putting words together. It gets you better at putting words together, and it sort of helps you to push through even when you don't feel like it. Um, as far as the writer's block, what I find is I like to have several works in progress at once. And if you get a block on one of them, you move on to another. And maybe that one will suddenly be freed up, even though you were sort of blocked on it before. And if you keep moving through them, eventually you get them all done. You just sort of have to have a lot of them going at once and being able to switch around, I think.
Definitely. So, what is your daily writing routine like?
Um, I write pretty much all day, although, I'll sit around and when I get a little tiny little bit of burnout, I'll go off onto social media for a few minutes, look around there, and then go back to it. But I write a lot of music reviews for Music Street Journal, so a lot of times I've got to get those knocked out every day, and then whatever other time. I mean, I do. I write my scripts for the YouTube channel, so I'll have to. I have all kinds of different writing I have to do every day, so it all depends on what day it is. Today I wrote finished writing a script for a spooky news segment that goes live on Friday. So it's I don't know. I There's no real schedule. I just sort of do it all day.
How do you feel your personal experiences have shaped your writing?
um, I think that you can't really write except from a point of honesty and who you are, and I mean, you can learn. One of the things I think is most important, especially for fiction writers, is you have to have empathy, and empathy to actually be able to sit down and think about what would this other person be like if they came up a different way than I did, and what would their reactions be, and what kind of a life did they go through, and how did that form them. So you have to come up with things like that to create believable characters. um, but on the other hand, you are always sort of limited by your own experiences to some degree. um, I can't imagine what it would be like growing up in Africa, for instance, and didn't do it. I could read about somebody who did, and I could try to put myself in that position, but I wasn't there, and I don't have those experiences. So I think to some degree those form who you are, and influence your writing. But you can also get past those if you try to learn to see into other people's minds and actually listen to them, and try to understand them better.
Very well said, Mr. Gary. Sing a song of bread. Is there a follow up for this book or anthology?
I don't know. There might be. I do. I tend to do follow ups on these things. Like one of the very first books I published with Tales of Wonder and Dread was a collection of vampire stories called Lifeblood, and I had no intention of doing a second one. And then a few years later, I had enough vampire stories again, and I found a few other people who had some, and I thought, okay, we'll do Lifeblood too. So I don't have any definite plans to do a follow up to Sing a Song of Dread, but I would not be surprised if one comes out in maybe 3 years.
Yes, good luck for that, and we gonna watch for that, Mr. Gary. So before we go on, I'm inviting you to listen to my other podcast, Geography 101. Geography 101 is all about the places that I visited from Europe, Caribbean, North America, South America, Asia, and a lot more. So please do listen. Geography 101. Plus, one more, my books is out. Is all about my Geography 101 of my 100 episodes of my first season and is already out. Geography 101 Volume 1 Europe. Available on Amazon and leading online bookstores worldwide. So, Mr. Gary, sing a song of dread. What do you think the best highlight?
Um, Highlight. I mentioned that I saved the Beatles story. I absolutely love that story. I just think it's a really, really fun story. That's probably the highlight. Although there's R.C. Mulhare, who's a contributor to a lot of my stuff. She's also got one in here called Blood on the Stage, which is sort of her modern retelling of Edgar Allan Poe's Mask of the Red Death, and takes place on a cruise ship and focuses on a Cajun musician. And that one is a story that really stands out in here to me too. So I like all the stories in it though, really.
What do you think? What's one theme or message you hope readers will take away from Sing a Song of Dread?
Um, I don't know. I don't necessarily always work for toward a message. I just think that entertainment is a message in and of itself, and I hope people are entertained by the stories.
How has the publishing process been for you?
Well, again, I've been my own publisher for, when I did my first book, that was actually kind of interesting. When I did my first book, I was shopping it around when it was probably about three quarters of the way done. I was shopping it around to a number of publishers, and since it was a nonfiction book about music that's based on literature. I thought, well, the two obvious types of publishers are music publishers and literature publishers. Well, as it turned out, the literature publishers thought it was too music oriented, and the music book publishers thought it was too literary. So I was really kind of bummed out about that at first. And then I thought, I had all these musicians I'd interviewed, and I thought everybody's really counting on this book coming out. So I looked into self publishing and started and did wound up doing that. And there are pitfalls to self publishing. For instance, you don't have the marketing that you get with a publisher. Although, to be honest, some of the big publishing houses, depending on how well they really are looking at your book, they don't necessarily really do much marketing on that either. So that's can be kind of a wash. But you've got to do a lot more of the work yourself. But then the funny thing was when I did my second book, which is the one about the interviews with musicians, Poetry of the Air. Um, I thought I actually had a publisher, a music book publisher, who was interested in publishing it. And I thought about it. And then I decided, you know what? I've gotten used to this much control on the books, and I don't really want. Well, I'd had to be. All right, back it up a little bit. With Strange Sound of Cthulhu, there was a German publisher who did a German language edition of that book. And while I got some money out of it, I mean, I got paid and everything was fine with that. I didn't like the fact that they controlled when it was released. They controlled when it went out of print, and I wasn't too happy with that. So when this other option came up for Poetry of the Air, I thought, well, maybe I'll think about it. And then I decided there was just too much of a loss of control. So I went ahead and self-published that. And since then, I've never looked back, and I self-published them all. It can come with some headaches. I mean, sometimes if the files aren't coming out right, or, it happens, and, the headache's all on you to figure it out. But ultimately, I think it's worth it because it's really yours, and you get to call all the shots.
What is your inspiring message for the aspiring writers out there?
I would say that only you can tell the stories that are in your head. No one else can tell them. And, just go ahead and write. And again, like I said earlier, don't try to strive to have it perfect. Sometimes, as long as it's good or very good, that's enough. Even some famous writers have been known to go through and they'll look at their older works and say, I wish I hadn't written it this way. And everybody loves that book, but they say, well, I wish I hadn't written it this way. And maybe sometimes in later editions they actually revise it and change it around. So don't expect to have it perfect ever. Perfection doesn't happen. And remember that if you get reviews, just because one reviews a negative review, it just means that person didn't like it. Doesn't mean that everybody's going to dislike it. Doesn't mean it's terrible. Even when you get rejection letters from publishers, I've written for a lot of editors over the years of doing freelance writing, and I can tell you that different editors look for different things. Different editors will want different things changed, and that can actually change by the day. Think about it. They're human beings. They can have bad days, and if they happen to read your piece on a bad day, they might look at it differently than if they'd gotten it on a day when they had enough coffee and were feeling all energetic and having a great day. So don't take it personally. If you get a lot of the same feedback over and over again, you might want to think about looking at that. But don't get all worried about rejections or bad reviews. They're really just subjective, and it's one person's opinion. When I do music reviews, I've had people contact me about the music reviews where they disagreed with something I said, and I always tell them, look, it's just one person's review. Just because I saw it that way doesn't mean everybody else is going to. Don't get so upset about it. And that's the fact. It's very subjective, and you can't take one person's opinion and start really getting worried about it.
Gary, can you please invite our listeners to buy our books?
Yes, please do buy all the books. There are a lot of books. The best way to check out all the books, go to GaryHillAuthor.com, and you'll find the ones that are just mine alone are going to be on a page called Books. But if you go to the Tales of Wonder and Dread section, there are 4 pages of books. Those are the ones I published with Tales of Wonder and Dread. And you actually will find links to everything else I do, Music Street Journal, the Spooky Ventures. You can get linked to everything I am involved with through that. So it's kind of the one-stop shop. And most of the books are not available on Amazon. I used to do distribution to Amazon, but I found that I had to raise the prices so much just to make a small amount on them that if I just published through Amazon or through Lulu alone, I can drop the prices and still make more money off of them than if I did it through Amazon. So the more recent books are only available at Lulu.com, but the Gary Hill Author site has links that take you to Lulu to buy them. So that's sort of your one-stop shop right there.
Well done, Mr. Gary, and thank you for sharing your talents to the world. And yes, I'm inviting you to listen to my other podcast, Music 101, people. Music 101 is to empower music itself, musicians, songwriter, and singers, bands, legendary icon in the music industry. So please do listen Music 101. And thank you, Listen Notes, for my latest score of 26 and belong to 10% popular show globally. Thank you, Listen Notes, and of course, FeedSpot, being the number 7 best art book podcast need to be followed this 2023. Thank you so much. Mr. Gary, thank you for your time.
And thank you for your time. This was fun.
Yes, Maricam people, see you soon.